Hey, what's up everyone? It's me, it's the Last Lucia here. As always, follow me if you want to follow yourselves. Hopefully we get there together. So it's a new day, it's a new life, and this is a whole new segment. This one's called Real Talk. I just want to get some feelings off my chest. I really feel some type of way about something right now. I'm really fucking wound up and I want to talk about it. First out, I just want to, I appreciate everyone that supports me, everyone that's a subscriber, everyone that follows me on social media. Thank you so much for your patience. I know I'm a crazy basketball guy, but thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak and having my words listened to. I really appreciate that. Thank you for your time. I hope you're having wonderful days and that your lives are going very well. If you need anything, just holler at me anytime. What I want to talk about today is, white supremacy and cultural nationalism, or like just straight nationalism. And what I kind of mean by those terminologies there is, first of all, whiteness, it's not just biology when we're talking about race and stuff like that. Race is a social construct, meaning that of course human beings come in a variety of sizes, attributes, and identities. But what we're talking about is the system of power and social power and privilege, power inequalities as they function through institutions, culture, and on the interpersonal level by individuals, how they're enacted. And so we're really talking about power, and we're talking about systemic sort of things when we talk about white supremacy, whiteness, and those sorts of terms. And, like I live on stolen native land, which, there used to be over 600 indigenous communities that were all across here, and there was no such thing as like these national borders and these securitization measures and these police forces and that. They, were self-governing and they had collective responsibility, and, things were much better in terms of social violence and stuff than they kind of are now as a result of the state and many of our institutions. And so I'm going to give an example of that today. I'm older. I was born in 1983. I'm turning 35. I'm 34 right now, so I'm quite old, I guess. Not really, I'm kind of young still, but it's relative depending on where you are as a listener. So what I'm trying to say here is I was born prior to the War of Terror. And I call it the War of Terror, not the War on Terror, because I don't believe other people are creating terror. I believe terror, the origin of terrorism, was, a government in France at the time instilling civic virtue and enforcing behavior through the use of violence, policing, and random executions. So that was actually the roots of terrorism, right? That's what, the terror was what originally was. So I always look at through the vein of institutional and state violence. And, like war, has killed somewhere in the neighborhood of 13 to 17 million people across, I believe, 10 different nation states since 2001. But in addition to the effects around the world, what we've seen at home, here like domestically, in my life experience, is the rise of a form of white cultural nationalism or toxic white supremacy, or just white supremacy flat out, whatever you want to say here. But it's not just the prevalent kind of white supremacy or notion of whiteness out there, as in society's institutions, their cultures and interactions are sort of favoring one identity over another, and that they're, not doing this like with vicious ways, but more so just general systemic features of society and how it functions, right? So what I'm trying to say here, it's not just egregious personalities or mean people that are engaging in racism. Oftentimes we make the distinction and stuff like that of forms of oppression. We say somebody is a racist or a sexist, and we look at them, well, they have bad language, bad attitudes, and they're a mean person. But there's also the systemic side, which is more insidious, and it's the way you structure opportunities in life, manage your resources, and have different flows of power, inequalities, or social privilege. And that's, racism, sexism, oppressions on the systemic level, right? This is an individual case, this is a systemic phenomenon, right? So what I want to talk about today is I've seen, since this War of Terror, this ideology of nationalism and of white supremacy just grow and grow and grow and grow and grow, pretty much unchecked by a lot of white people, to be perfectly honest. And recently, I believe it was the past summer or September or something like that, there was an incident in St. Thomas, which is just outside of London here, and someone who is employed in a high-profile law firm, they have like, $100,000 to $200,000 a year salary. They drive the newest BMW out right now type of vibe, you know what I mean? And this person also comes from a very wealthy family, obviously. That's how they got many of those other things. But this individual just went to a random shopping mall in St. Thomas, armed, I guess, with a baseball bat in his car. And I don't know what had happened, but he saw a Latin American family that had come from Colombia, and they're quoted as saying the reason they left where they were from was to come to a place where there was less war and social violence. And so they were shopping at the mall, a teenage boy and his two parents, his mother and father, and this, white, very wealthy, prestigious lawyer got out of his BMW sports car and proceeded to attack them with a baseball bat while screaming terrorists, screamed the name of a certain terrorist group, organization, claiming that they were them, tried to place them under citizen's arrest or police arrest, very confusing, and this lawyer, perpetrator, assaulter guy broke the teenage, boy's rib cage, and hit his mother with a baseball bat and hit his father with a baseball bat several times for a period of 3 to 4 minutes without anyone intervening. And so, that's the attack itself. And the guy was charged and all this stuff. And he had a long list of charges, aggravated assault and all these different things, right? And there were several counts, not just one. So why I'm making this video today is because I believe institutions, culture, and sometimes our interpersonal interactions, the dominant culture and just the dominant form of interpersonal interactions, sometimes favor and privilege one group over another. And I believe that this is a really egregious example of that sort of thing. So when this guy went to court or whatever, all he said to the judge was, I was high on weed. And his parents were like, oh yeah, and he was nervous a couple of weeks before. So the judge determined that this wasn't a hate crime or hate attack because the guy had smoked a joint. Now, I don't know if anyone has ever smoked weed in their lives or anything like that, but I have, certainly. And no matter what type of weed or how much, it has never made me want to get in my vehicle with a baseball bat, chase down a family shopping in a shopping mall, scream at them that they're terrorists, place them under a police arrest though I'm not a police officer, and proceed to beat the shit out of them with a baseball bat, breaking a teenager's ribcage for almost 5 minutes. I've never smoked anything that's ever made me do that. And in fact, when us existentialists talk about responsibility and you are what you do, I don't believe in a human nature that drove that guy's behavior. I don't believe in some eternal, commandment or law, or even these civic institutions and their laws and traditions can prevent choices like that from being made as a result of this toxic ideology and the social structure we put out there. So as a result of the war and all these politicians who weaponize this discourse, they come up and they use the term like terrorism and war for their political opportunities and their career gains. They just have to say, we're going to go to war over here. A bunch of people vote for them because they're scared of the stuff they said in ideology. Be afraid of people that are different than you. Be afraid of people that don't look like you. Be afraid of people who are not from your place of origin. Be afraid, be afraid, be afraid. Now we're going to go to war. And then these things become self-perpetuating. That's why these leaders are in office multiple times after initiating 1 or 2 wars, right? So anyways, getting back to my point here, basically the guy got off with absolutely nothing. This guy broke a teenager's ribs, hit the teenager's mother with a baseball bat, and beat the teenager's father with a baseball bat. Basically kidnapping them for a period of, I don't know, a few minutes or something like that because he was claiming to be a police officer, and literally assaulted the fuck out of them. The judge gave him a conditional discharge, which means, nothing. Essentially, if he follows the rules that the judge says, he'll have nothing, and his record will be cleared. Like, he'll have no crimes on his record. This man is like nearly 40 years old. He's not like somebody who didn't know what he was doing or doesn't know how to constrain his behavior. I mean, the man was driving a sports car. The other thing too is like he claimed to be high at the time, claimed that he was on weed, and yet the judge does not even give him impaired driving. Whereas anyone else, I don't believe any other legal defense, if you're coming from an oppressed community or somebody who's from a non-dominant identity, if you try to stand in the court and say, I was high, I'm pretty sure it's not going to be, the judge is going to say, well, let's let you go then. And I'm pretty sure if they have video evidence that you drove to the scene of where you beat the shit out of somebody with a baseball bat and then told the judge, well, I was high, they would more than likely convict you with an impaired driving charge because it's on videotape that you're impaired. You're also the one admitting to being impaired. You're saying this behavior was caused by my impairment, but I was okay to drive there and afterwards. Like that. So basically, I don't believe that police, the courts, and many of our, dominant institutions, the dominant culture, and the most general ways of our interpersonal interactions are very fair, just, and in fact, I do believe that they support, one identity over another, that they are white supremacist, and that they will continue to do this sort of thing. And so in these cases, while I'm not an advocate of criminalization or throwing somebody in a jail cell, I don't think this guy should go in a jail cell. What I think should happen is he's confronted by a whole bunch of community members. Absolutely. And I don't mean a whole bunch of communities go there and just beat the shit out of him with a baseball bat or some stupid thing like that. No, I mean like those families and other Latin American families who have faced that sort of violence and who have that lived experience and who are affected by those ideologies and this constant toxic discourse that comes from politicians blaming people who are different than us or who look, aside from the way we look. We treat them as the demonized other, the enemy, the people we are scared of. As a result of that, that's what happens. You have literally 17-year-old boys having their rib cages cracked open by 40-year-old men with baseball bats screaming terrorist, 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 terrorist for absolutely no reason. And so I don't think the guy should go to jail. I think he should be confronted by a whole bunch of community members who want to talk right in his face and make him know that there are consequences for your action. And not just the legal ones, not just some notion about eternal's law and God's punishment later on. No, here on earth right now with affected communities and the people that you have to live and relate to, there are consequences for your actions. And I'm super upset because I'll tell you right now, my former partner and one of my best friends, Louisa, is from Colombia. She came here, leaving medical school there. Just because you can make more money as a worker here working really shit jobs and stuff like that and send the money back home. She came here and she worked for 8 years. 8 years to support her family. And that allowed her mom to have a better apartment and a better life back home. That allowed her cousins and her family to eat and have support, have clothing, and feel loved. And she came here and she was assaulted by police. And I know our relationship wasn't perfect, and I'm not a perfect person at all. But I'll tell you what, you ask her yourself what that assault did to her. You ask her what the lingering effects of white supremacy and institutional discrimination and unjust treatment and oppression. You ask her how she feels about the subject, okay? And I'll tell you right now, if that would have happened to her or any member of her family, I wouldn't have been able to constrain my behavior whatsoever. I would have found out where that person lives. I would have went right to their door, and I'm not saying I would have necessarily hurt them or punched them in the face, but I would have put the fear of life into them that they would have never felt. Because, I can't even give you a reason as to why it's beyond the level of cognition, but if you would do something like that to a community member or a family member or someone I'm in a relationship with, I probably wouldn't behave in the most ideal fashion. That's all I'm going to say on that one. And likely I would have some legal consequences as a result. So, what I want to just say here today is I think we all have a responsibility to end this fucking war. I think we all have a responsibility to end this goddamn war. I think we all have a responsibility to fight these toxic ideologies of nationalism and stuff like that. Like, I'm on a basketball and life sort of podcast, that I really enjoy with some people who have different views than my own and stuff like that, and we dialogue, which is great. But then you have, literally white supremacists coming on there blaming people not from, their place of origin for all the world's social problems, when in fact it is, the people that own the factories, the people that are in government, the people that are, taking your money to try to run for government. A lot of them, are creating the world's social problems, as opposed to people just coming over here trying to work to survive and uplift their families from poverty and just improve their material conditions a little bit, So I really think we have a responsibility to fight these toxic ideologies and those discourses about nationalism, white supremacy, and that sort of thing. I think, in our everyday life, the more we can confront them, both with our words and with our actions, the less acceptable they will be. And if people tell me that it's not important, and sometimes, why don't you just don't care what people think or something like that? Well, that's why, because I don't want to see a 17-year-old kid and their family have the shit beat out of them and their ribs cracked open from some 40-year-old, $200,000 a year lawyer because, the government has for 11 or 17 years told him so much about terrorism and all these other things. Because if you want to be absolutely serious, killing 17 million people, worldwide is absolute terrorism. The fact that, communities don't have clean drinking water, people lack access to healthcare, that is terrorism. You know what I mean? In addition to sub-state political violence for whatever motive, right? So, yeah, I'm super upset by this. I talked to my friend Louisa, and she was pretty disgusted by it, but I'm sure she feels happier to be home in Colombia, because right now in North America, this white supremacist cultural nationalism stuff has really, really taken off since the American election. And here in Ontario, we're coming into another election, and unfortunately, it looks like one of those dudes is going to get into power here in Ontario. They're going to ride the back of populism, which means people really angry, a whole mass of people angry. They don't know why they're angry, they just feel really angry, right? They don't have a structural perspective. So a guy like that comes in and he says, blame this group, and they're like, okay. And then he says, well, we need to crack down on crime, we need to increase the borders and all these other things. And then he also takes away all the funding for, social infrastructure, supportive community programs, all that sort of empowering stuff. And the result is, these people can play on our, manipulated and created political fears to stay in office and to give themselves paychecks and to have a career, when in fact they're doing nothing substantive for our communities whatsoever, and just removing resources all the time and treating every single community member like they're opening them to the possibility of criminality or, hate attacks and individualist violence as long as this continues. Like in my city, the white nationalist, white supremacist sort of groups have assembled, I think it was like 12 times since last year, and there's been a lot of, counter-protests as a result. But the main problem with that is that we don't attach our counter-protests to any form of tangible public policy or material change, so it becomes just a battle of white people yelling at each other, as opposed to disbanding the war, policing, securitization, border structures and stuff like that, so that the actual material constraints, which drive some of those ideologies, like, the material conditions give rise to behaviors, right, and ideas, would go away. So I think, we really need to address the war. We need to address every single, city and municipality's participation in the war and start examining war economies. Like here in my city, several different plants have closed down in the last couple of years, laying off thousands of people. But one of the largest forms of employment, there's now up to 12% of the city works in arms manufacturing, with General Dynamics, Accuride, and some of the other places that, are part-time military contractors or full-time military contractors. The largest Canadian trade deal ever in the history of the nation state is the sale of like $16 or $15 billion worth of weapon systems to Saudi Arabia, which are already currently being used to oppress and hurt, vulnerable populations and specific communities over there, which is supposed to be illegal in our system, again, just like assaulting somebody with a baseball bat, but our governments and our institutions just let it go anyways. They, on the record, like on their paper, on their charts and their institutional codes of whatever, it says that these things are illegal, but then they always find ways around it because it benefits them. It benefits the power structure. That judge found the incident of beating somebody with a baseball bat, calling them a terrorist and breaking their ribcage and assaulting their parents as not a hate crime, even though the guy was using politically loaded language for the reasons of hate, exclusion, social dominance, and to engage in violence against them. Even if you were smoking weed, it doesn't abstain from the fact that that was specifically a hate crime, clearly. But the judge then said, well, I'm probably a supporter of the war on terror. I kind of don't like, immigration, or I believe that, people that don't look like me are terrorists. So yeah, this white guy that looks exactly like me and comes from a rich, wealthy family like me, and I share social class with him, yeah, he was high on weed, so that wasn't really a hate crime. That was just he was high, man, right? Right? And then on the other hand, here you have my government, the state and the federal government, selling $16 billion of arms sales, despite it being illegal to sell weapon systems to human rights violators, nations, and all that sort of thing, which was their reason for, going to war in the Middle East several times over in the last, 20 years. And then they turn around and sell them all these weapon systems and that sort of thing. while also, like, you know, being against their culture and some of their social practices and all that stuff at the same time, which is really convoluted. Like, you know what I mean? You have politicians that come out with, you know, legislation targeting specific communities regarding their culture and stuff like that, and at the same, you know, for whatever practices they don't like, and then at the same time we're selling those, you know, nation states $16 billion worth of weapon systems to do the exact same thing at home. So it's like, you know, it makes no sense. The governing institutions, the dominant forms of culture, and the most general, you know, forms of social interaction, they're typically white supremacist, and they favor one group over another. In instances like this where there are, you know, victimization or assaults that happen, like hate crimes and stuff like that, oftentimes, you know, because those institutions, those judges, those courts are attached to the dominant power structures, they just let people off with those kinds of stuff. But like, you know, if you're like, actually, yeah, let's talk about that. If you're in the United States right now, one of the largest groups incarcerated is a diversity of women, and a lot of them are behind bars for defending themselves from, you know, assaults by men. Like, they're getting charged, you know, right? But this guy didn't. He's got a conditional discharge. Provided he just doesn't do one of the, you know, things that they asked him not to do, he'll never have a criminal record. But women defending themselves against men over here, forever, in their entire lives, will bear that burden and have to wear that mark now, you know, affecting their employment, affecting their economic circumstance, affecting their autonomy, all that sort of stuff. So, I know I'm just kind of going off here, but this really messed me up, you know, like, I'm one person, I don't know how to fight white supremacy or end a war type of thing, but I just figured I'd like make this video and we could talk about it, and you know, if you want to chat, hit me up anytime. I think it's on all of us. I think we bear responsibility, you know, to do this. I don't think that that action from that guy, though I didn't personally do it, and I would never choose to do anything like that with my life or existence, I'm still bearing some responsibility for that because it's my nation state and my governing officials that are spewing out that toxic ideology, that cultural nationalism, that white supremacist bullshit. And I need to confront it, both in my daily life, in my community, and, you know, when I can on social media and other forums, and tell, whether it's elected officials, people trying to vie for political office, whether it's those hate groups trying to organize in the street, whatever it is, I need to, you know, like, physically, visually, and verbally confront them so they know what they're doing will not stand, and that it's enough already. Okay? So I think that's all I have to say on the subject today. Thank you so much for your time. I hope you have a wonderful day. Again, I'm the last Lucia. Follow me if you want to follow yourselves, and hopefully we get there together.